The crackdown on Iran to end its nuclear ambitions is hitting a critical stage. The U.S. is targeting Iran's wallet and sending a warning to China, India, and South Korea that they must significantly reduce their Iranian oil imports or be cut off from the U.S. financial system. For more on this money war with Iran, we're joined by former Homeland Security Secretary and Chairman of global security advisory firm Chertoff Group, Michael Chertoff. He's with us live from Washington. Secretary, welcome to In Business. What do you think about whether this economic pressure is working right now?
Well, first let me say I think these measures are overdue, and I'm glad we finally have them in place, because striking at the central bank and at the financial lifeline on which Iran depends is really quite a strong blow. But it's only really just begun, and in terms of whether it actually changes Iranian conduct, I'm somewhat skeptical and hesitant to believe it will actually have that effect. But I think we've got to exhaust all remedies short of armed force before we turn to the ultimate sanction.
So if you're skeptical here, if the sanctions don't achieve their intended outcome, what should we be factoring in here?
Well, I think there are a couple of factors. One is this may wind up weakening the regime, and I think probably the quiet hope of most observers is not that the mullahs are all of a sudden going to decide they don't want to pursue nuclear weapons, right, which they have asserted as a goal, but rather that internal pressure will wind up weakening the regime, perhaps even causing a change, and that might step them back from the brink.
And yet, you know, sanctions for any students of foreign policy or security like yourself, so often they look at historic cases and say sanctions are a blunt instrument. They very rarely work in terms of regime change. Whatever the attempt is here, what do you think the outcome will be for the Iranian people and in terms of the global security threat? Is it making things more dangerous, or is it actually making the world safer?
Well, I think in the short term, of course, it's going to be tougher on the Iranian people. It may, in the short term, also create a little bit more danger around the world. If you look at the last year, you've had the Iranians apparently detonating bombs, trying to target Israeli diplomats in various parts of the world. We had an Iranian-sponsored plot uncovered here in the U.S. To kill the Saudi ambassador by blowing up a restaurant. So clearly, one of the reactions you have to be concerned about is the Iranians will actually carry out terrorist attacks against Western interests around the globe.
Do you think that we will see a weakening of the existing sanctions as we move through the year if some of these risks are recognized?
Well, one of the concerns you always have is, are people going to have the patience and the perseverance to keep up with the sanctions? And I'm quite sure that there are countries out there like China and Russia that are going to be pushing back pretty hard because they see benefit in being able to work with Iran. So it's going to really be up to the administration to continue to keep the pressure up, not to relent, to be tough in terms of not granting too many waivers, and to also be relentless in pursuing people who are going to try to evade the sanctions using various kinds of alternative financing vehicles.
What are some of those alternative financings and ways that Iran could get around these sanctions and being cut off from the financial system?
Well, you know, you saw a story in the last couple of days about a relaxation of the restriction on money changing to allow prices to rise against the Iranian currency so that money changers will be willing to take the risk of engaging in transactions. I'm quite sure there are going to be some banks overseas that are willing to try to get around the sanctions and take the risk, again, for a risk premium. And then you have a fairly significant informal financial network that works around the world, including on the internet, where you move around the existing banking institutions and you move money through alternative pathways.
So it sounds like not only is money fungible, but there are so many ways to work around these sanctions that near term you don't see any change.
Well, I don't want to underestimate the importance of the sanctions. Even though there are workarounds, it is clearly more cumbersome, more difficult, and more expensive, and it is going to have a negative impact on the Iranian economy. The bottom line question is whether the leadership of Iran is so committed to building a nuclear weapon or getting, let's say, one step away from a nuclear weapon, that they're prepared to take the short-term pain, and then hope at the end when they achieve their objective, they'll be able to say, well, time's up, now remove the sanctions.
All right, Secretary, good to get your perspective. Thanks for joining us today.